I just love ChatGPT. It makes it so much easier for me to. I think I'll put a T-shirt on. Hold on 1 second. Uh, put on Kiss T-shirt. There we go. Show my generation here. Generation X, everybody. Born in 1970, Los Alamos, New Mexico. To a homemaker and a physicist and chemist, guy named Regis Holland. I'm Kieran Holland. I'm his son. I have a brother named Gavin who works at Hughes Research Lab, and another brother who is a lawyer named Brennan. He's got cancer right now, so we're incredibly concerned about him. Anyhow, I always find myself getting into ChatGPT and asking it questions about things that I believe that I know or things that I've discovered. And it confirms them, and it says things like, oh, you're 100% correct, And I've heard it say stuff like that about other stuff where I wasn't correct, but, it tries to be positive, or they design it to answer you in a positive way. And so I figured I'll just tell it about this stuff. And one of my concerns was if the healthcare industry had really improved, or it hadn't really improved after the end of telemed, which was a project that the Los Alamos National Laboratory had, where they were trying to use Corba, which is a vendor agnostic API language of sort that's supposed to permit integration across boundaries. Basically, produce a industry standard for interfacing all sorts of industries. And one of them that was trying to be done here was the healthcare industry. And one of the problems the healthcare industry has, and still has, and has not really fixed, is uniform ID across the entire United States and world. They use database IDs, and database IDs are not reliable because for every organization that you add to a database system, you have to have an overarching database to keep track of the relationship between all the records from one clinic to another, to another, to another, to a hospital. And the only way they can gain integration is by having one big hospital or one big organization buy up a bunch of little organizations that get all their records correlated into a grand ID system, all managed by databases. And so it's the same old problem of you're not represented by your attributes, you're represented by a number, and like a social security number. And it makes it incredibly easy for your identity to be hijacked. What they did in the telemed project is they had defined a number of things that would be necessary in order to have a cradle to grave healthcare record. Now, most of the stuff with HIPAA has only to do with insurance and coding of procedures. You don't want the insurance companies to have access to people's health care because it's private and it's personal, and it could ruin somebody's reputation, especially a politician. Politicians know this, that if they ever have an HIV test, they don't want anyone to know they had an HIV test because it would say that they had dangerous sexual behaviors. They might be gay or something like that. And those things would really affect their campaigning. So the HIPAA was really kind of the HIPAA, that stuff was really just a legal document that said you can't let my health care get out to the insurance companies or to the world. It's got to be protected, and if it gets out, then there'll be heads that will roll as a result of this. And in a court of law, we can prosecute so the insurance companies don't want to touch it. However, according to ChatGPT, it said it didn't really keep the insurance companies from having access to the healthcare information. It just kind of lays down a process by which they should be controlled. And I was just like, wow, that's not very helpful. And so the telemed project, I had no direct relationship to. It was indirect. I was working with David Kilman after the fact that the telemed project had failed, and he was trying to come up with a kind of proof of concept, something that would point out that it would be possible to have a peer-to-peer ID system, and create a true cradle-to-grave healthcare record by using people's attributes, their physical attributes, a combination of biometrics, not just retina scans, not just blood type, not just your address and your name, which are called ID9s in HL7, not just, it's a combination of things. And since Corba was being used, the way that this was done, how these were recognized, and the closeness. See, if it looks at two records, and it looks at the IDs that are representing those records, and the ID is a combination of biometric information, and it compares that biometric information to determine whether or not it has a close match. And then somebody would have to come in and look at the information, say, yeah, this guy is that guy, and put them together, and now you have two records from different clinics that are seen as a whole record. However, you have to have credentials necessary to access both records. That the record doesn't get transferred to the other site unless they're both the same hospital or something like that. It would have to be handled at a governmental level. But the idea is that gradually you would develop connections, and it would just gradually come together in a peer-to-peer way, but not in a peer-to-peer way like peer-to-peer piracy like Napster was. Napster was really just taking advantage of the fact that the internet is designed as a peer-to-peer model. That is, every node on the internet is both a transmitter and a receiver. This is the reason why the internet is just naturally counter to the culture of the past of the broadcasting systems, because TV broadcasting is a transmitter and the TVs are receivers, but there's no transmitter kind of thing going from the TVs to. So it's because of this nature that permits things like torrent piracy to even exist. And they've been trying to control it. Corporations, everybody needs it, but there are corporations that really don't like the peer-to-peer nature. They would like to have the broadcast nature back. And but there are benefits to having the peer-to-peer design or the pattern, especially in healthcare. It would permit us to have a cradle-to-grave record. And when somebody gets hurt, we wouldn't have to go digging into their privacy in order to find out the contraindications that would determine what that if you're going to apply general aesthetic or anesthetic or whatever, um, if they're um, if they're allergic to general anesthetic or I'm not really a doctor, but you can understand what the concerns would be. The idea is to have before the doctor everything necessary for them to make medical decisions when the patient is not cognizant and in a state where it's life and death, and you've got to have timely information. They do that, as I people have told me, they do that, but it's kind of rustic. It's using telephones and sending files and things like that. It's not well controlled, and how that works. And sometimes I'm sure that the doctors probably won't touch to the patient until they have enough information to treat the patient, or they'll have the patient write sign a document, or have somebody that related to them sign a document that says we can't hold you accountable if the patient dies, so that they can protect themselves from a malpractice suit. Because malpractice will, according to a relative of mine who has passed on, used to be a doctor, he gave up his practice because of the idea of having a malpractice suit just didn't appeal to him, and so he determined that it just wasn't really worth it to be in the medical industry, and he was old enough that he could retire. So he says that malpractice takes three things when you and it only takes one malpractice suit to end a doctor's career. It takes your license, so you can no longer perform as a doctor. It takes your insurance, your malpractice insurance, because the lawyers are going to go and try your case and stuff. But and it takes your practice, and so you lose everything as a result of a malpractice suit. And it may not even be your fault. All it takes is one um, zealous patient that believes that doctors can cure anything, and think that this doctor is you know flawed, in that their loved one would have survived. And people have way too much faith in doctors. They have way too much faith in scientists. My dad said that science is the study of the observable universe. If you can't observe it, it's not science. It's like belief. And there are a lot of people who believe in evolutionism, but nobody's proven it. They've proven that there are patterns of evolution, and it makes sense from the perspective of developing evolutional programs, putting little bots in simulated universes, and them developing their own formation so that they can survive in certain situations. But the original proof, what Darwin used as proof of concept or whatever, was not proof. The duck bills that changed their width or whatever were in fluctuation. That it wasn't evolution. And so these days what they do with evolution is they just take lots of stuff that, this is my belief, they take lots of stuff that has the pattern of what looks like evolution, and they clump it all together, and they say this works, this is scientific and stuff like that, but they're not really willing to really test it. It's a belief system. It's a different kind of belief system, and they pursue it like a belief system, like any other belief system, like Christianity, but they feel like it's more secure. And whenever you put a lot of trust and faith into something that isn't very well defined, that is essentially a belief system, with some science associated with it, you can get into problems kind of like with malpractice suits, or with things of that nature. People thinking stuff like survival of the fittest is going to get rid of the Sabbath, and things like the Shemitah, uh, which was in the Bible, was the idea that people need to have rest. And if you get rid of rest, people are going to be excessively stressed, and they're going to be susceptible to all sorts of, the thing that I always talk about, cognition is impaired, your immune system's impaired, tissue regrowth and reproduction. It also causes things like clogging of the arteries. This is all stress related stuff. Go talk to any doctor about it, they'll tell you. And so malpractice and, stress, people, hypochondriacs, they get stressed, their cognition doesn't work so well, they get super paranoid, and some doctors are so sick of dealing with these people, they might actually give them a bunch of forms to fill out, and then, have the nurse come out, check their blood pressure before and after, and if their blood pressure has gone down, they're hypochondriacs. There's nothing wrong with their bodies. They're not sick. And then they just send them home with some aspirin, I'm one of these guys that just thinks deeply about things. I don't really consult with other people. I'm a filter feeder. I'm kind of like a coral, that just kind of sits there with my organism and just picks stuff out of the air out of the water that comes as the food comes by. I just pick it out. I pick up information and I just kind of stew on it. I think about it and I compare it to other things that I've heard. And then I just kind of have a tendency to repeat things over and over again. Then I get something like ChatGPT that will actually confirm some of the things that I've talked about. It will also kind of just repeat some of the stuff I've said. So, it's not truth really. It's half truth and half me trying to convince myself that I know something. Anyhow, I'm trying to piece together, and I'm trying to recognize the major concerns, or I'm trying to recognize the pattern of what I see as a big problem with the healthcare industry. It's not the only thing that's costing us. It's something that if you fixed it, it would help to recognize all the other things. It's kind of like a flashlight. If you develop this system, a cradle to grave, peer-to-peer model of keeping people's healthcare records secure and using credential checks and logging accesses and determining access to certain records based on credentials, having multiple credentials to determine if the doctor is really someone who has the necessary credentials to get access to the record. They're going to be logged, and the information, if it needs to get sit from one place to another, needs to be encrypted, and then it needs to be validated to make sure it came from the place that it was sent from, and validated on the other end to make sure that who's getting it is officially someone who can receive it. All of those processes need to be in place in order for something like this to work. How this differs from something like Napster and torrents is that nobody has to have any kind of verification, validation, or any kind of checks. They don't even have to have encryption. All that's happening there is a peer-to-peer data access, a free access of data. And you don't want to pass your medical records around on a torrent or on something like Napster. The reason why those were so effective was because everybody wanted to listen to music or they wanted to get access to media files. And somebody determined a way to do that. And while the structure of the networking app, or the way these things work, is not evil, it gets used by people for evil means. And uh, some of it's kind of neutral, some of it's bad, some of it's good. But what it really does is it keeps, in the case of torrents, it keeps um, the corporations or the companies, the cable companies, from limiting the, because the reason why originally when we got DSL lines that cable companies kept the uproute traffic at a like a 10% of the down route was to keep, because they thought people were going to start stealing television. Then somebody came up with the torrent system and found that if you take all the people, if you distribute the program that everybody wants, the movie or whatever, to everybody, and then use the 10% that each person has as part of a bigger server, you can make 100, 200, 300% transfer rates from all the people that have the same file. And it pretty much nullified the scheme that the cable people had in place to prevent people from spreading live TV. And which it does. It doesn't keep you from getting movies or things that you want. It also makes it easy for people to get. If you're going to use a torrent, don't pass programs, because it makes perfect sense to someone who is a malware designer or somebody who's going to use people's computers for things like selling, um, uh, doing cyber warfare, which is one company buying up their services to attack another company's system so that they're set back and the other company can exceed them, and the other, that's cyber warfare. And how that works out is you get commercial software like Microsoft packages or whatever, and you send them through a torrent system with malware attached. And the people that need that stuff in order to pass their documents around, because if you've ever written a proposal for a grant or whatever, to get some money from the government or to get it from whoever, the format they require you to do it in is in a Microsoft Word format. So what are you going to do if you don't have Word, or you don't have the necessary applications to pass those documents? You're going to get something from a torrent. You're going to download a program from a torrent, and it's going to have malware attached to it that your malware system doesn't even recognize. It'll get spread to, other people. You'll give it to other people will get it over the torrent, and pretty much soon you have a security hole into your system by which a company can pay another guy to use your Windows systems become botnets. Botnet is a compromised computer that can then be used to attack corporations. It doesn't affect you personally. It affects corporations and governments. And I pointed out to ChatGPT that I think it was because of security holes in Microsoft Windows, because Windows is a closed source proprietary operating system. In the beginning, Microsoft, when they sold their services to IBM, didn't were just basic interpreter designers. They didn't know anything about operating systems. So they basically hacked their way into the operating system industry. And so it's just been this long hack where they haven't really had any time to really do a good design of the system. And it's the belief of many that there are security holes all through, and there are examples of that, such as using or distributing with applications old libraries, old C++ libraries, because of their tactic of re-releasing libraries you already have, software you already have that you don't need, but putting something extra in it, and with that comes a security hole. And if you've got all these packages that are installed in your Windows machine, then then there will be internal data fragmentation, internal code fragmentation, and that is bad because it takes up a lot of storage to redundantly store the same code and data all through the system. And because there's a lot of redundancy in storage and not redundancy in use of not reusability of a single library like there is in Linux, you can't distribute the applications with the libraries in the application itself. They are installed separately. The libraries and the applications are stored separate from each other, and that's to encourage reuse of the libraries. So there isn't that internal fragmentation in a Linux system. I think the Macs are the same way. And it's possible that Microsoft has learned from this and the new systems work that way, but it's still the truth that a lot of their stuff is open source and they're plagued. I mean, a lot of their stuff is closed source and they're plagued by all of these choices of things that they chose to use in the past just to get people's favor so they would stay inside of their network of stuff. Right now, it's not so much of a big deal because people use web services, and Microsoft has moved in their Office stuff into a web service. But I'm sure there's still their executable parts. I don't use Windows myself. I use Linux. And the reason why I use Linux is because I had a difficult time with Windows. It always seemed like somebody could break into my system no matter what I did. And I did, you can name it, I did it. I installed service packs off the internet, from the internet through, and did MP5 binary checks to make sure that the packages I was getting were valid, were the ones that were being passed around on the internet. I took all the precautions that people take in companies whenever they install Windows, and nothing helped. And so I just gave up on using Windows altogether, and all I use now is Linux. And one Macintosh. I got a Mac Mini M4. And the other day I got a warning that I had malware in my machine. I just determined it was really in the web browser. It was something that was stored in a cookie or something inside the web browser, and there was some code that was in Safari that was making it seem like it was infected, but it wasn't really. But it put the fear into me because I don't know anything about the low levels of the Macintosh. But on Linux, I don't have the same problem. And so, anyhow, that stuff put aside, I was talking about, I have a tendency to go off on tangents. And to keep that from going even further, I'm going to backtrack to what I was going to do, which is I had a conversation with ChatGPT in terms of telemed. And I've said this many times on my other videos, but now I have something more solid and backed by what ChatGPT can dig up. And I really strongly, I strongly suggest people use ChatGPT and use this AI stuff because it is extremely beneficial. It permits people to learn stuff on their level. You know, professionals don't have to become computer programmers in order to understand stuff about computers using ChatGPT. Anyone can learn about things, they can question things, and what ChatGPT really is a kind of a relational database. But what it does is it uses language. It uses the language that you use to talk to other people to extract from what you're saying a context, which is a the constraints of what you're wanting to find. So if you're like wanting a pizza and you don't know it's called a margarita pizza, and you can say, well, it had basil on it. It had this oil. It had olive oil on it. It had tomatoes. Then ChatGPT will say, "Oh, you want a margarita pizza?" I actually had that dilemma. I lived in New York City for 2 years, and I didn't know. I knew that I liked margarita pizzas. I didn't know they were called margarita pizzas. And I kept going around to every pizza place and saying, "Do you have any pizzas that have like pesto on it?" And some guy told me, if you had pesto on a pizza, it would cost $1 million. And so the idea is that it was too expensive to put that on a pizza. I didn't think that. I don't think that's. But what he was saying was saying that it would be more expensive than normal. It didn't make any sense. But if I had ChatGPT, I wouldn't have been searching New York for margarita pizzas and a place that served authentic New Mexican food. I told somebody I was from New Mexico in Manhattan. They said, "Oh, how do you like it in this country?" That's how pathetic New York is people in New York don't see America. They see New York, Florida, and San Francisco and Los Angeles. They see the major cities. They see Las Vegas. Everything else doesn't exist. They don't know what they don't know that there's a New Mexico in the thing that we have as New Mexicans. A big problem we have is being recognized as being in the U.S. There are still a lot of people in America who have no idea, but it doesn't faze me. I don't really know where North and South Dakota are. I don't know where any of those, because I don't have much to do with those states. And they probably don't know a whole lot about New Mexico and Colorado and Texas. And, well, they all know about Texas. I mean, you can't really pretend not to notice Texas, and that's where I am now. Anyhow, 33 minutes. I made sure that there was ample storage time on the device I was going to use to record. This one doesn't have enough storage on it because one thing I tend to do whenever I'm on YouTube, and because I use UDIO, which is a music generation program, something I like to do is to load in samples from some place and remix them and see what the AI will do with them. And so I'll record those. I'll use a program called Record It, and I'll record it from YouTube, and then I'll send it through UDIO. I've also just confessed to the fact that I don't have copyright privileges, but I don't think it really matters because I don't usually publish stuff like that. It's just a kind of it's a curiosity that I have, a natural engineer curiosity. And the reason why they have the question in the first place, because they don't want people publishing commercial stuff inside of their music programs, at least not recognizably. So they have to have something in place to protect themselves. And but anyhow, that's the reason why I'm not using this guy over here, this iPad. And it's only got 14% power on it. So, okay. Most of the music that I publish in my Udio Rock Me Amadeus guy is from prompt. I've not had much success using samples, and I don't like to use samples for remixes and stuff because you can't publish it inside of the UDIO site. So you have to give people links, and yeah, it's just nasty. And I've had more success with prompts anyhow. I did one recently where I used a manual prompt uh, rather than what I usually use is I'll give it some band names and it will break those down into genres. A manual prompt, you just put the genres that you want together. In either case, you're going to come up with a commercial artist's voice and style if you're using the version 1.0 of the model inside of UDIO. They used to be really paranoid of what people would release, and they didn't want people to put pictures of musicians in their music. I think now they're just kind of inured to it and saying, inured means that um, you're not like really that concerned. You kind of expect it. You know people are doing it. You can't really keep it from happening. It's not really causing you any trouble. That there's it's happening enough that you're just kind of ignoring it. Um, I think they're at that level right now, but there's still a lot of stupid people out there. They're trying to attract um, viewership. There's a lot of clickbait on YouTube. Adam Ragusa is turning to clickbait. Um, Rick Beato's turning to clickbait because they're losing all of their viewership to the shorts on YouTube. And so people are not able to gain the viewerships they used to have. They're losing viewers. Um, Rick Beato Adam Ragusa used to have like 5 million subscribers. Now it's like 2.7, and he's getting like super paranoid. Rick Beato is just like at it with UDIO and Suno, thinking that will bring in viewers. And I think people are starting to realize that the only musicians that are really threatened by UDIO are the commercial artists, the ones that have been getting paychecks forever, like the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac and stuff. And uh, but I point out that the reason why the record industry isn't what it was in the 70s is because it was the only replayable medium in the 70s. It was the only thing you could really count on being there that you could replay over and over again and save money by replaying rather than going out to a theater to watch a movie, buy a ticket and watch a movie. Um, a lot of things cost money, and the records were something you could save money and just re-experience over and over again. But it's no longer that way. Now we have many choices, and because of the choices that we have, the record industry is just. We were a captive audience in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. We were a captive audience to TV, radio, and record players, and the record players were the only thing that we could re-experience. We could re-experience 8 millimeter films, but nobody's passing around movies on 8 millimeter films unless it's some old Marx Brothers or some old uh, what was it? The silent era stuff and da 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 da, the Ollie and what and I forgot what their names are. Um, those two guys, the fat guy and the thin guy. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So those were on. That's what people experienced on 8 millimeter back in the 70s. I remember going to the library and you pull out an Indian 8 millimeter film and you watch it on a little projector in a cubicle somewhere in the library, and that was a form of entertainment. But that there were no video playback systems at that time. They didn't come around to the 80s, and when we got all of those options, you know, we could we had choices, and record industry went downhill from there because they no longer had a captive audience. MTV kind of was like cocaine for a while for the record industry, but when MTV went away, it was, you know, it's like, how are we going to make money now? And we got these CDs that store 72 minutes or 74 minutes of information. How are you going to get people to buy a $16 CD if they've bought all the greatest hits albums in the world? What are you going to fill them with? And so you can probably see the reason why the 90s sucked so much was because a lot of the music was from people that were just coming up with ways of filling time with crap. Either it was EDM crap, rap crap, or grunge crap. But it was crap nonetheless. And some of it was good, but for the most part, it was nowhere in comparison to the 80s, and certainly no comparison to the 70s. And the reason why the music sucks today is because there's no competition. They don't want competition. They have the same musicians every year, and they just don't want any competition to the musicians they've got in their pockets. And so they keep the big stars really big, and the small ones, they just never get in to that limelight or whatever. And there are people who are still convinced they're going to make it big. There's a video, or there's a commentary by Jim Morrison of The Doors. It was in one of the movies where he just sat there and he couldn't understand why people watched or consumed music from the same crew of people when he knew there were people around that were more talented that weren't getting airplay. And it's, now everybody has airplay and has the capacity to pass their information around. And it's because of the peer-to-peer model of the internet that everybody is both a transmitter and receiver, a transceiver. That's where transceiver comes from. Modem is a modulator demodulator. That's the reason why it's called a modem, is it modulates, it turns sound into data and turns data back into sound. So you can use a telephone system with a modulator demodulator. And then we've got DACs, or samplers, digital analog converters, and then analog to digital converters, ADCs and DACs. And that happens a lot across data and analog systems. And all these people saying, oh, the digital doesn't sound all that thick and everything. Got it wrong. Digital is going to do better at your lower end frequencies than it will at the higher frequencies, because it loses resolution as you go up in frequency. So they're just full of shit. And who is it? Neil Young was trying to push a raw format of sound file, and nobody really jumped on board because the way MP3s are not MP3s, MP2s. MP3 was a proprietary format that handled sound over telephone modem rates. And it was a proprietary thing, so it wasn't even part of the open standard for MPEG. But we call them MP3s because that's what people used. It's the format that got passed around, not the MP2s. But whenever, really, we're just using the MP2s most of the time. The joint stereo, the stereo at data rates of 112 kilobits per second and up, that's all MP2. MP3 is under that. And so, but people still call it MP3 because of the file suffix, the MP3 suffix. MPEG was designed to be edited without loss. And the reason why they did that, or how they did that, was they cut it up into frames. And it's described in frames, frames of video and frames of audio. And they're synced together frame by frame. And if you want to edit them, you edit them like you do tape. You cut it at the frames and you splice them together at the frames. You don't want one frame to be overlapping on another frame. It doesn't make any sense. So you do it where they meet, and that's how you edit films and magnetic tape and whatnot. That was the idea behind the MPEG format, Motion Picture Experts Group. The idea was to make it accessible and easy to pass around video and audio. And it was spearheaded by guys like Sony and Philips because they wanted to put movies on CDs, and which eventually became DVDs because it was a lot easier to manufacture and produce CDs and DVDs than it was videotapes. And so it was, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, in this case, Sony won in a lot of ways, and people are kind of scratching their head as to why things just hit the fan. It's because things get better and people get crushed in the process. And when you've had that happen to you for a lot of your life, every new technology looks like something you don't want. And so the Luddites kind of sit back and say, well, we don't want AI because it's going to ruin our jobs. They don't even, and because they're so paranoid and because they're so stressed, their cognition goes out the window and they don't bother to learn stuff. They don't bother to, because one way to get, according to Howard Jones, one way to, the way to deal with things is don't crack up, bend your brain, see both sides, throw off your mental chains. That's how you get over the fears that you have, is by going in and learning about stuff. And then in it, learning what it can't do and what it can do. And from that, you determine what your new approach to working and living is. And you will find that there's benefits to it, and ChatGPT has got benefits to it. Is ChatGPT going to replace us? Something we found with the training of these models is it takes immense amounts of power to do it. And also they found out that it doesn't fully scale as you go further up in the amount of training. It actually grows in an unsustainable way. And so they're kind of like, well, it plateaus out, and then it doesn't plateau out, it just goes exponential, but it's not something we can sustain training these models. And so we'll just end up with a bunch of little models. And what they're doing with models now is they're starting to quantize them. That is, they're kind of like with a math problem, rather than doing a math problem with 64-bit math, which you don't really need because 64-bit is so high in resolution that a 64-bit number can represent all the atoms in the universe. That's how much precision it is. And you really don't need that kind of precision. So maybe 32, 16, they're finding they can get these brains quantized down, and that is represented with less and less detailed numbers, and still be somewhat accurate down to about 6 bits per parameter. And so they've got AI image generation brains where you can give it any kind of prompt, and you can say, I want a picture of Morgan Freeman riding a unicycle, and it does, and it can make an image of that with a 3 billion parameter brain, which is stored in a 3 GB file. And programmers um, know that this stuff is hocus pocus. It's to a point, because they write 600 lines of code, and then they can train the AI off of using the schema that's defined by that code. And it will, it looks like I'm going to do my thing about the HIPAA on the next video, but because I got on a tangent. But the idea that this quantization and makes it so that you can essentially do the stuff that you would ask a service on the internet to do for you with AI at home. I do it on my Mac Mini M4. I've got a copy of a package called Sogni, and then I ask it to download a 3 GB file, and in that file is the model of a brain, a trained brain that produces images based upon a prompt. And so I can ask it, make Morgan Freeman smoking dope, and it'll do it, And that's because it borrowed its understanding from a bigger model, but some of the precision was lost. So maybe Morgan Freeman doesn't have the same number of toes, but who cares, And so it has some imprecision to it. If you get it down far enough, it will be very erroneous. You'll ask it a question, and it will give you the sort of response you would get from a crazy person in an asylum, because the error in their answer will be so great that it won't be reliable. And interestingly enough, that happens with people. If you're not going to go and consult with somebody who's got dementia, no, because they've lost a good bit of their functioning brain, and so they can't recall things, and their brain's not functioning like it used to. And so that's what happens when you over quantize these models. And they have models for ChatGPT is what's called an LLM, a large language model. And it's really just for processing text. You give it a question, or you give it a situation, you give it a context, and then it fills in all the possible, it uses that context as a constraint on what it comes up as its result. In school, we programmers got a language called Prolog, and Prolog was one of these systems where you put in all of these rules. Amy is the mother of Tom. Tom is the father of Jason. What is the relation of Amy to Jason? And you would put in these rules of what a mother was, what a grandfather was, what a grandmother was, and then it would draw the relationships, and it would say Jason is the grandson of Amy, and Tom is his father, and it will come up with multiple answers whenever you query it that was just a simple thing for us so we could understand how Prolog worked. But now we have ChatGPT, which pisses on Prolog, and there's no reason. I mean, why we're going to do these models in Lisp or Prolog, or maybe they're done in Python, but internally it's just a bunch of numbers, coefficients, and parametric function like things, and summations of things and weights and biases, and the information goes in one end and stimulates all these little committees of deciding based upon the stuff coming in what the answer should be in terms of yes or no, and out comes the other end something you can use. That's really what's going on. And the LLMs use like a box of text. You put your text into this box, and 10% of it is used as a 10% of it is used as a key to answering or to testing to see if it learned what was in the other part of the box correctly. And so you feed all this information into this box, and it's kind of like learning 90% of something and then being giving flashcards on stuff that you weren't trained on but are related to what you learned. And that's the way these LLMs work. You stick all this data in there, and then you use 10% of what was stuck in, the truth, all this data, and it uses that to determine the validity of the stuff that it's got in its neural network that it's collecting from the text as a whole. And so it's continually doing that, and then there's these functions that go through and optimize the neural net and make sure that it's verifies stuff and then adjusts stuff in such a way that it's more and more precise. Now, the reason why those things lie sometimes is because we lie sometimes. There are dictionaries where extra words are added for the sole purpose of tracking plagiarism. It was also done in encyclopedias. And so there's even lies in our reference materials because the companies that published them didn't want it. They wanted to be able to detect plagiarism, and the only way to do that is to see if the people that were competing with them were using their own terms, their made-up terms, in their dictionaries and encyclopedias. If they were, then they could come out and say, you plagiarized, and we're going to take you and sue the fuck out of you, And so your encyclopedias and your dictionaries are even just a little bit incorrect. Wikipedia is crowdsourced. It's correct for some stuff. For some stuff, it is going to be in flux because because people are upset, and they if you try to put something in there that's controversial, then the information is going to be in flux. But they log everything. They log every edit. So if you want to see what something looked like before it got messed with by all these people, you go back and you can look in the log. They got this journaling log system that goes back to the very first parts of Wikipedia. And because of that, it makes it much more correct than any other kind of document you can reference. Because not only that, but you've got behind every page, there's a talk section where people will sit there and discuss amongst themselves how correct some of the information in that article is, and things that people should consider. And then they've got these watchdogs that will watch a page and see if it's having a lot of edits being done in a really kind of excited way, which would seem like somebody is sitting there re-editing things. They're making decisions about stuff. They're not passing along truth. And those guys have watchdog bots that'll go in there and look. And if they see a lot of that pattern occurring, they'll go in there and they'll revert it all back to what it was before, and then they'll find the IP address of the person that came in or their name, and they will ban them from that article. And they're no longer permitted to edit that article because they may even ban them altogether because they'll find that they're trolling the system. But if only Wikipedia was if only the healthcare system was as correct or as watched and guarded as Wikipedia was, we'd probably not have a lot of the cost associated with our healthcare. It's because the FDA and all these watchdog organizations that we've got in our government are being lobbied against and having their processes dumbed down enough that pharmaceutical companies could get by without having a complete not tested. We do know now that prosthetics are not tested at all. There is no watchdog organization. It's laughable. There are things getting through that are ruining people's health because the materials and the ideas were not medically sound. And that's the reason why healthcare is getting worse, is because all of these people that are having to pay these malpractice suits and whatnot whenever they come around. There's people in the healthcare industry that shouldn't even be there. There's people in our watchdog organizations that are trying to make them less effective, all in the interest of improving the capacity of private industry to create new solutions, when 90% of them are just reformulating the same chemicals so they can get them patented and then make a bunch of money off of it by pulling the wool over the eyes of the consumer, and 10% of them actually doing something that's worthwhile. It's probably all justified in that, these big companies have a lot of people working for them. And if they weren't to have all of those repatented pharmaceuticals, they wouldn't be able to support all those people. But, there are people in the business industry that believe that the market is self-fixing, that those people that should fail do fail, and it's not happening. What's happening is that they've lobbied the law in such a way as to keep them in power longer than, just like Trump's keeping himself in power, keeping themselves in power beyond relevancy, remaining middlemen, being middlemen and not being there for a reason, and they will use the fact that they hire so many people as a justification for them being there. But the reality is those people are not doing anything useful. And okay, I'm going to continue this on a different video because, I know the Yers and Zers, us Xers will probably watch an hour-long video. I do. But the Zers and the Yers and all those, the younger types, and maybe even some of the older people that are getting up in age and just don't care anymore, are not going to watch a 1-hour video. But what you can do is you can turn to Gemini or ChatGPT and ask them what this video says and have it watered down for you, and maybe pull out something of an outline that makes it more effective. And I don't mind that. I don't mind people extracting 5 minutes from the 1 hour that I talk. I don't edit these videos. And it's the editing of content, the adjustment of the adjustment of context. I took a course on this. I've said this many times. It was called Guerrilla Video, and I didn't really take it because I wanted to. I took it because I had to have satisfy some credit hours for my degree in art, and I was curious as to how linear video editing was done. And I took this course during the summer, and it was about the manipulation of context, of audio and video context, in order to be deceptive. It's basically what Michael Moore does. An example of it was that in his movie Bowling for Columbine, he wanted to present the idea that you could go to a bank there in that town and get a bank account and then get a gun, which they were promising people in the same day, which they weren't promising people. And what he did was he showed the part of him getting the bank account, and then it showed him walking away from the bank with a gun 2 weeks later, but he didn't tell you it was 2 weeks later. He just edited one part to another and let you draw the conclusion, which is what he does. That's called a manipulation of context. And he also likes to manipulate audio and video context in such a way that some of the video will end up overlapping on an audio context, and you'll think that the head of the NRA said something when they didn't. And what he does is he sits with these, Michael sits with all of these audio files and video files and tries to figure out how to generate a message by adjusting these audio and video contexts in such a way that your brain assimilates the information, then conceptualizes it together, and then you remember it in that context, in that mixed context, and you don't know that one was, it may not even have in it to say that this audio is not related to that video. But he doesn't have to do that unless somebody comes along and says, you've mixed the context here, this is illegal, this is fraudulent, and take them to court. They don't. It just ends up being entertaining information and whatnot. And all you have to do, if you want to know if Michael Moore is a good guy, you can find out that he's not such a good guy by going back to see what it was that inspired him to do the kind of art that he does. And it was in high school, he compelled the people in the school to fire the principal. And when he experienced the power of information in that way, it drove him to do that with everything that he pursues. And he will tell a lie if it fits the narrative and the agenda and what he's trying to do. If he has a truth and he knows he doesn't have enough proof for it, he will generate proof in order to compel the audience to think the same way he does. It isn't entirely untrue, but it doesn't have much support for, he's really doing it on a belief. He's not doing it on 100% accuracy. It's not detailed enough to be accurate. And but he uses those the manipulation of context in order to get people to accept the wrong information. Media does this. Trump does it to a very great degree. What he does is he will say the wrong information until people believe it. That's the way he works. And the reason why he does it is because it's worked for him in the past, and he'll just keep doing it until somebody says you're a fraud and throws him in jail, and then he'll start saying a bunch of crap that's wrong in order to get people think that he was unjustly thrown in jail. And he's a sociopath, I guess. But there are reasons to have guys like that in the government, is because there's sociopaths in the government other than him. And if he's bent on trying to get rid of the swamp, he's going to need to have a lot of proof of that. And him saying it's not going to be enough. It's going to come after the fact when people look back on it. And it's going to be important to him that there is enough evidence of it. People will ignore all the other stupid stuff he did and maybe see some of the good stuff he did. People are determined to think that everything he does is wrong. And if you're always determined that the president, whether he's Democratic or Republican, is going to be wrong about something, how are they going to be able to do anything right for us if we're jumping on them for every little thing along the way? And I don't vote anymore because, I didn't really vote, but I really don't vote now because I feel like it's not having enough faith in God. If you really have faith in God, why would you need to vote? And if you're going to vote, why not vote random? Why not say a little prayer and then just reach out and move switches and stuff, Because voting for someone is going to potentially create a leader that's going to limit the free will of others, even whenever it's not really hurting anyone else. And God gave us all free will, and to deny God's will to give us free will is a sin. Now, people continue to sin because that's choice. Choice is sinning or not. You don't really know what's a sin and what's not a sin, but you need to have limited perception. You can only see with your eyes and your ears, hear with your ears, talk with your mouth. When you talk, there's so many levels of miscommunication, cultural, popular culture, slang, current events. Anything that you don't know is going to get in the way of you communicating something to other people, because they're going to be put back by what you don't know, and in that be distracted and not hearing anything else you have to say, or they're just not going to understand it because they're from a different environment. They're a professional. If they're a professional, they're going to be thinking in the context of being a profession in their area, and you start talking stuff to them thinking that you're communicating to them because they're a professional in a certain area, and you're not, because your stuff is coming over as sounding stupid to them. It's going to distract them, but you can't keep that from happening, and that's just communication. But it permits, because we have limited perception, it permits us to make choices. We make mistakes. We do great things, but we also make mistakes. There's some people that will tell lies thinking that that's a suitable way of dealing with things. In some cases, it might actually be, but for the most part, it's going to cause people to lose trust in them. And I think Trump is just inured to people making fun of him and stuff, that he's going to have some things that are worthwhile what he's doing, but then he's going to spread disinformation to the world because he doesn't want the media organizations to be successful in communicating anything about what he's doing, good or otherwise. It's if you really want to stop AI from being developed, give it noise. Just give it 100% noise, and it won't be able to draw any truth or false conclusions from anything because it won't find a pattern in random noise. So that's how, and that's the virus. That's the thing that would kill off the AI, is if you just fed it random crap and it was trying to learn something and it didn't have the things in place to help it realize that what it's getting is complete, is chaotic, is entropy. It needs to do the tests to determine that the information it's getting is indeterminate, because it will try to train itself on anything that it gets, even whenever it's completely random. So I don't really have anything to do with Trump and the things he's doing. I'm really not for him. I'm really not against him. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if what he's doing is correct. There are people that work around him that do other stuff, and they do correct stuff, while he'll just be this lightning rod of criticism, which seems to be his approach to the world, is to be a lightning, and in creating that distraction, all the people that are distracted by him are going to be paranoid and stressed, and they're not going to be able to think straight themselves, and they're going to start coming up with all sorts of conclusions. Don't be a part of that stuff. Throw it away. Our voting system doesn't work anymore. It doesn't matter who we vote for, because the rich people are nominating the people we vote for. And the revolving door, and the people that go through the government are coming back as lobbyists, being paid 8 times as much to manipulate the laws to favor the corporations. That's the reason why our democracy is gone. The only thing we can do now is pretty much wait it out and trust in God. And just like the Howard Jones song, you can't change the world single-handedly. Play the flute and sing your song or whatever, He's a Buddhist. So you just get rid of the stress. A lot of religion is just get rid of stress. Don't try to fix the world. The world's fucked up, but it's fucked up for a reason, and that's so that we will have the capacity to make choices and explore all the nuances of choice. That's my belief as a Christian, is I believe that from the very beginning, God made us imperfect because that would permit us to explore. It would help us to know that we don't know everything, and we wouldn't be able to prove to ourselves that we could know everything. And in that, we have to be forgiving of others, because we're not perfect. Anybody claiming to be perfect, those are the people that you go and you stone, because, or you yell them out of the room, because nobody can be, because we have limited perception. I was talking with someone in my family during Father's Day, and he was talking. He was saying, "I don't believe people use all their brain. They must use like only 10%. I believe the people are dumber these days." And I said, "No, it's been disproven. That thing that we were told in the past isn't correct, because they found through um, scans that people use all of their brain." And my belief is that our experience, that everything we experience is compressed into the brain through conceptualization. And we've got fragmentation in our brain, like there's fragmentation in Windows. A lot of redundant information around that is not being stored, is not being useful, because we haven't drawn the relationships between that stuff and have compressed it down into a concept. You know, we're not drawing relationships between information adequately. That can keep you stupid. Also, to know the difference between patterns that are alike but are not the same thing, to keep distinctions, and that's what learning is. It's acquiring knowledge. It's determining the validity of it. It's determining if it's still valid, or if there's, because you need to have an understanding of what was in the past to understand why you're not going to go back to the past. History never repeats. You don't want history to repeat again. So you keep aware of the things that are past, and ChatGPT is going to make this easier for us. And it's going to make it easier for us to conceptualize information, draw things together, and learn more. That's what I think the benefit of the AI is going to be, is making our assimilation of information much more effective. Assimilation not as in the Borg, but assimilation as in streamlining and packaging things in our brains more effective, so that we can make use of it. And if we have any problems with it, if we feel like we're wrong, because we're going to resist going to ChatGPT, because sometimes because we want to be right, and we're afraid that ChatGPT is going to point out that we're wrong, and you don't want to know that you're wrong. That's just a natural urge. It's a natural preference of humans, is to believe that they're right, and they don't like to know it whenever they're wrong. And but it's necessary, because it's going to make it easier for people to accept what you have to say, and they won't be distracted by the things that they learn differently. And when they bring up the stuff that they learn differently, and you come up with, "Oh, I don't know, maybe I don't know this, I can go chat," they're going to lose faith in what you have to say. So, but anyhow, I'm going to have to do this on a separate video. I'm always doing this.